And I love how Nathan just kind of talks to David about this. Because David is running after the more and more and more without realizing what he's doing. But eventually, David comes in and says, forgive me. Lord, forgive me. And that forgiveness is granted, but the consequences are still there. We have been looking at the Ten Commandments in just kind of different ways. And when we look at true north, we see it as this unmoving point on the globe, right? So the actual true north is something that we can point to and we know it doesn't change. Where magnetic north does change slightly depending on where you are in the country and solar flares and things like that. There's kind of this idea that could be shifting just a little bit, right? And in our lives, we need that true north. We need something that we can hold on to versus the shifting of the world around us. And as we've been looking at that and God's grace and the God's law as that true north, we've been looking through the lens of Martin Luther, right? And so Martin Luther, as he looks at the law, right? The commandments are kind of an anchor point of that law. He says there's really three things that the law does in our lives, right? The first one is that it's a mirror. When you read it or you see it, you say, I'm seeing myself in this, and you have that moment where you're convicted, right? Or that it's a curb, right? And that as you see the consequences of whatever it is, that your behavior is curbed by that, right? We know that if we were to drive a car over that curb, it would have consequences. You'd at least need a realignment on your car, right? There's things that happen if we go through with things that may have consequences. And then for Luther, if you follow Jesus, then the law is really a guidepost. It's kind of like that true north, that never-changing element that helps us see what it means to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Today, I want to take just a few moments and talk about the 9th and 10th commandments, right? And so we see those as the 9th commandment being you should not covet your neighbor's house, and the 10th as being you should not covet your neighbor's other stuff, right? Now, if you are not someone who grew up with Luther's small catechism, this might seem like this is just the 10th commandment. Because Luther, as he went through, he kind of broke things down just a little bit differently, and he combined what others see as the first two commandments into one. That being that the Lord, let's see, in Exodus, it's this, right? You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or above, right? And so some traditions, that's 1 and 2. For Luther, that was 1, and 9 and 10 is the breakdown. All right? So if you were confused, hopefully that clears it up. But really what this is looking at is saying, you know what? You should not be looking at your neighbor to give you value or to see what you should be doing. Because if you do that, you're going to want more and more and more and more, and you're going to covet. You're going to covet what they have or what you don't have. And we've also, as we've been looking at this, saying, okay, so if that's what the commandment is, what is it that we're actually supposed to be doing? What is it pointing us towards? And I think these commandments are really pointing us towards contentment. Contentment being that kind of inner joy and peace of knowing that you have what you need, right? You're able to say, it is well with my soul, and mean it. Now, that's an easy thing to say or maybe to sing like we will at the end of our worship together. but it's a harder thing to actually get there, right? Because more and more we strive after the stuff. But the more we strive, the more we realize that more isn't enough. The more and more we chase after things, the more we are dissatisfied and we keep on running. Now, different generations kind of talk about this in different ways, right? I was with a young gentleman who was just starting out in a company. And one of the reasons that he chose this company is because he could level up. He was going to start on the ground floor, but within a certain amount of time, he could make it to management. And then asking him, okay, is management your goal? You want to get into management? Oh, no. I want to become a manager, but then I want to get into that C-suite. I want to become a chief executive of something. Oh, okay, great. That's what you want to do with your life. Oh, no. Eventually, I'm going to own the company. It's going to be all mine, right? He kept on wanting to chase the more and the more and more and level up in that way. For others, it's this idea of keeping up with the Joneses, right? That neighbor that you have that has all the stuff that you want. Kind of like the neighbor who knocked down their garage to build a 2-story unit with the grandmother suite, and you can barely get your car in the garage where it's at, right? You see that and you say, now that's good. That's what I want in life, is to be there. Having ambitions and going after things is not the problem. The problem comes in when you are putting that above everything else and it becomes an idol, that you are going after more and more and more, and you don't realize that more isn't enough. But the world also helps us with that, right? Because it talks about more money, more problems, right? As you see the stuff that people get, there's things that happen within that. This isn't a new thing. This is something that's happened from days of old, right? King David, perfect example of this. King David's story goes like this. He's a man after God's own heart. He is crowned king, and things are going well. And at some point in his reign, he looks off his balcony and sees a beautiful woman, and he says, I got to have that. He has the whole kingdom at his disposal, but here he is coveting, seeing more and more. And in that, he puts her husband on the front line. He gets murdered. And then you have the story from our Old Testament where Nathan comes in. And I love how Nathan just kind of talks to David about this. Because David is running after the more and more and more without realizing what he's doing. But eventually, David comes in and says, forgive me. Lord, forgive me. And that forgiveness is granted, but the consequences are still there, right? We get caught up in that moment as well of going after more and more till we realize more isn't enough, and we repent, and that forgiveness is there for us as well. But this idea of trying to get ahead and trying to just focus on this thing that's in our lives that we want more and more and more of, so often we put it up on a pedestal and it becomes our idol until we realize more isn't enough. And so, what do we do when we get to that point, right? Well, I think it's important that we listen to Jesus and what he has to say, because as we look at the Gospels especially, he tells us all about where our priorities should be and what kind of perspectives we should have. That it's not really about the stuff, it's really about him. And that's the gospel reading from Luke 12, right? Is that Jesus is trying to get these two gentlemen to realize that it's not about the inheritance. right? It's not about building the bigger barns. And we can relate to that. We can relate to the idea of, we're getting more and more stuff in. We got to build up and up. Whether that is going on in your career or education or whatever it may be. But listening to Jesus, we see that it's not about the possessions. It's not about any of the stuff that's being rich toward God. And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, what does it mean to be rich toward God? And I think we listen to Jesus even more as he sits on a mountainside and he begins to teach people in the Sermon on the Mount. And part of that is this verse that says, seek his kingdom first, right? But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. You see, it's not about the worry of the stuff. God will provide. He's got us. But it's about seeking him. And as we seek him, we begin to see what it means to be a child of God. To really gain a perspective not on stuff and getting ahead, but seeing ourselves as a child of God who is loved and forgiven and has a hope for tomorrow. And as we gain that perspective, we begin to see how we can share that with the world around us, right? It's beginning to see how God's grace is enough for our lives. That in God's grace, we can settle. We can see how it is well with our souls and see how contentment really looks like. Looks like I'm taken care of for tomorrow. As in tomorrow as an everlasting life. And what that means for us today. Right? And that's something to share. Not just to hold on to. But to say, yes, God, it is well with my soul because I know you and what you've done for me. And I can see that hope and share it with the world around me. And I really think that that's the point of the Ten Commandments, as we look at them as that true north. And we hear how Jesus talks about them. He really breaks them down into two categories, right? Love the Lord your God with everything you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. As we see whose we are as loved and forgiven children of God, we begin to see how that impacts us and gives us a perspective that's different. It's not about more, but it's about God's grace. And it gives us something to share and be connected to others. And so my hope is that as we go from here into our week, into our month, into our year, that you're really able to, when things get a little rocky around you, when you maybe see the law as a mirror or a curb instead of a guidepost, you're able to see that true north and be pointed back to God for who he is and what he's done for you, for that grace that's been afforded to you, so that you can know that you are a loved and forgiven child of God and the hope that brings. Because in that, we see what it looks like to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, everything you are. And in turn, love your neighbor as yourself. And as we can do that, we can look at the world around us and we can say, it is well with my soul. Amen.